Good afternoon. It's great to see all of you here. We welcome you. We're so happy to get this day started, and it's finally here. We have been working since 2015 to have this day, and there have been a few natural disasters and other quirks that have gotten in the middle of it, but here we are now. Let me introduce our board of the Winton Historical Association. My name is Libby Jones. Hugh Davis, he's in the back, is vice president. Margaret Jones is secretary. There she is. Bud Jones is treasurer. We got a lock on it here. Carolyn Bazemore. Thank you, Carolyn. Jane Newsom. Melanie Story. Thank you. And Marvin Jones was not able to be here today, and Sandra Newsom couldn't make it. I also want to recognize past board members who put in a lot of time and energy to get us where we are today. Michelle Felton, Tiffany Lewis, Gail Pipkin, who is present today, and Emmy Winstead, who's also present. There she is. I also want to remember two of our board members who have passed away. Mr. Lloyd Porter died in 2020 and served us faithfully for a good time. And then our good friend Maxine Britt passed away in the fall of last year. And we missed them. So our journey started in 2012. Michelle Felton and Sue Felton Woodward pulled together a group of people to begin talking about a historic district. From that point, we became a nonprofit and started raising funds so that we could submit a nomination to the North Carolina Department of Cultural and Natural Resources. So 5 years later, December of 2020, the Winton Historic District was entered in the National Register of Historic Places by the United States Department of the Interior. Now, the National Register is a list of properties significant in American history, architecture, archaeology, and culture. And it's a comprehensive index that includes the property of many of you who are present today. Our local researchers, when writing about each home or business, work to include the history of the owners of the properties. And we thank those members who help with the research for our historic district. Please stand or raise your hand as I call your name. Jack Askew, who's not here today. Barbara Boone Busher, right there. Marvin Jones, Michelle Felton, Fred Liverman Jr., Jill Reed, thank you, Jill, Susan Van, and Sue Felton Woodward. And there were many more. Now, if you're not a member of the Winton Historical Association, please join us. We have forms in the back, and help us with our mission to preserve and share the history of Winton. So this historic district will mean a great deal for property owners and citizens to help renew and develop businesses, residences, and community resources through access to grants, federal funding, and state funding. And we have membership forms available today, so please join us. Our next project is going to be the preservation of the Century Post Office Museum here in Winton. The building has been empty and, has been vacant. No, it's got plenty of stuff in it. It has not been taken care of for 20 years now, and we'll need your support and input as we move forward. Before I introduce our guest today, I'd like to share our historic district property signs with you. Over to the right of the big map is an example of the sign that will go on each property if you so choose. And I say that because each owner will pay for their own sign. That sign is for my mother and father's house where I now live, and it's an example of the way that we set up the names of the homes. We tried to use the full names of those who built the property or who worked with it for many, many years. My dad's name was Fred, no middle name. So that was his middle name was NMN on all of his documentation. And my mother was Elizabeth Wilson. So that's the Fred and Elizabeth Wilson Jones house, circa 1953. Many of the other houses have the last name of two owners who were had long involvement with the home. As an example, 303 North King, which is a large home that sits diagonally back from this church, is the Beale Jones house. The home was built by Jefferson Beale and his family, and it is still, and then was purchased by the Joneses, who still are in the house. So the house has a dual name. So things were set up in ways that we felt would help mark the history of the town. We'll order signs as we get orders for around 20, and the signs should cost an estimated $30 each. And as things go these days, that price could go up the longer we wait to order. But we can check with you. If you'll check in with us today, or we'll send you more information later. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Kelly Bowers, Hereford County Economic Development.
Thank you, Libby. Good afternoon. Great to see all of you up here. Stand this way.
No, other way.
Other way?
Sorry, folks.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. As Economic Development Director and Tourism, I am very interested in Winton. It's one of the most exciting little towns that has so much potential from an economic development standpoint. Not only do you have industry that's tied to Winton, but you have this great town with the Chowan River. And our future is to look to have more access to the Chowan River and start more tourism. And this would be the key place to do that. So in revitalization of the homes in your downtown area is key to the growth of Winton and to the economy. We can start offering services because you have the industry to support it. So we are actively looking for our homeowners to revitalize. We have about 6 builders and developers in the area that are interested in helping you, and I can help you kind of lead in that direction. I believe we have one today in the audience that visited us. So if you have questions, do you mind standing? Yeah. And tell them who you're with.
Hi guys, my name is TJ Dorka. I'm with Incredible Builders, and we're looking to help revitalize the area.
So we want to connect you with the resources that you need and help in any way that you can. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me and the Economic Development Office. I am in the 911 building at the courthouse. I'll be glad to do one-on-ones with you, anything to help you assist to make this process easier as you learn about what you want to do with your homes here in Winton. Thank you so much.
Thank you that we came to see today. Our first speaker is Jill. Will Jill go first? Okay. Jill Smith. She's the National Register Assistant for the State Historic Preservation Office. And I'll turn this over to you, Jill. You can do whatever.
Thank you, Libby. All right. Does everyone hear me okay? I'll speak up a little bit if I need to. Is that good? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Julie Smith. I'm the National Register Assistant with the State Historic Preservation Office. Today I'll be giving you a little overview of what the National Register of Historic Places is. Libby gave you a small introduction. So how did we get here? The goal of historic preservation is to protect the built environment, from demolition in the name of progress, especially for highways and urban renewal, as well as modern development. And for that reason, the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 was passed. It established federal grant programs to aid in states in preserving historic properties, require all federal agencies to take historic properties into consideration in project planning and development, and create the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register of Historic Places program is the official list of our nation's properties deemed worthy of preservation. In North Carolina, roughly 3,050 non-archaeological National Register properties have been listed. Sorry, I think I skipped a slide. This is the one I'm supposed to be on. So the National Historic Preservation Act, which I talked about in the last slide, of 1966, created the state historic preservation offices across the country. And some of the duties are listed here, including environmental review and restoration tax credits, and lastly, the National Register of National Register programs. So, as I was saying, roughly in North Carolina, there are 3,050 non-archaeological National Register properties have been listed, including 570 historic districts. Counting all of the contributing properties and districts, there are approximately 75,000 contributing resources in North Carolina. So what type of resources are eligible for National Register listing? First, we have buildings. These are structures created principally to shelter any form of human activity. Then we have structures, which are resources that have not been constructed for human shelter. Sites are the location of significant event, activity, or a building or structure, whether standing or gone, where the location itself is significant. And objects are considered primarily artistic in nature or relatively small and simply constructed. Properties can be individually listed or in districts. Districts have a significant concentration of resources historically linked by a plan or physical development like a mill village or historic downtown core. Properties may be listed for various reasons. There are 4 criteria for listing a property in the National Register. And I'll read the criteria from the slides, and then I'll go through each one specifically. So we have Criterion A for events, B is for people, C for design or construction, and D for informational purposes. Criterion A for the association of events that have made a significant contribution to the broad pattern of our history. For example, this Rosenroll funded school meets Criterion A in the areas of education and ethnic heritage for its contribution to the education of African American students in Durham County during segregation. Criterion B is for association with the productive lives of significant persons in our history. The Nash House, shown here, is significant for its association with a prominent architect, Arthur Cleveland Nash, who designed and constructed this Chapel Hill home in 1922 and occupied it while he worked as an architect during major expansion period for the university. Criterion C must meet at least one of the following requirements, and this is kind of a longer list, so hold on. It's for properties that embody distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent a work of a master, or that possess high artistic value. And this picture here depicts a 1963 Midtown Motor Lodge, which meets Criterion C for architecture as an intact example of modern style motor and building type. Criterion C is also for resources that represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. And this a historic district is the best example of this requirement meeting Criterion C. And lastly, we have Criterion D is for informational potential. This is usually an archaeological site. Some properties need to meet special criteria. These are called criterion considerations, and I won't go into each of these specifics. They're A through G. Just know that these properties need to meet special standards. To be eligible for listing, resources must have historic integrity, meaning the property retains significant original materials, settings, workmanship, association, and design to convey its history and significance. So within a district, properties are labeled as contributing or non-contributing. A contributing resource adds to the historic significance of a property or district that are eligible for all benefits of listing. Non-contributing properties are either constructed outside the period of significance or have been substantially altered. Properties within a historic district may be considered contributing even with a lower level of historic integrity. For instance, artificial siding may not necessarily be a deal breaker, and district boundaries are drawn to exclude non-contributing properties where possible and to maintain a strong contiguous district. So there's a process of how resources are listed on the National Register, and these are the steps that North Carolina uses. And first you have the study list, which are properties are identified through survey or at an owner's request, and then we keep a list of all of these. And then some of them move on to a draft of a National Register nomination that's submitted to our office, it's reviewed and edited. And once it's in its final draft form, it goes before the National Register Advisory Committee. And they meet 3 times a year. It's a group of professionals with backgrounds in history and archaeology, preservation, architects, things of that nature. And they consider the eligibility of properties for nominations to the National Register of Historic Places. And when they approve that, then the State Historic Preservation Officer signs off on it. And then it goes, the final draft, to the National Park Service for final determination. And there's no state register, there's just the National Register, but our study list is very similar to something like that. So this is Winton's National Register Historic District. It's currently, there's just one here, and there's 2 individually listed properties. The map shows the district outlined in blue, and also the map over here you can look at more closely later. And there are 2 individually listed properties, which are the blue dots.
Those are the C.S. Brown School and Auditorium.
Yes, the C.S. Brown School Auditorium
And
the
Gray
Gray
Gables.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So why the National Register? Listing is primarily an honorary distinction, a way to recognize properties and historic significance to the community and celebrate our heritage. It also has become a tool for economic development, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. So listing affords limited protection for federally funded or permitted development through the environmental review process. And the greatest attraction to National Register listing is the availability of financial incentives in the form of tax credits. In order to receive rehabilitation tax credits, all work must meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later in the program. The National Register listing is not the same as local designation. It puts no restrictions on what private property owners can or cannot do to their listed resource and provides little protection for properties beyond environmental review. This means that properties within the Winton Historic District area will have no added restrictions. Restrictions are only for local historic districts or local landmarks. Properties that have been locally designated or regulated by local historic preservation commissions, which are established by a local preservation ordinance. Local historic district designation is a type of zoning that applies to a group of historic properties. And unlike the National Register, property owners within local districts are required to apply for something called a certificate of appropriateness before any exterior changes are made. And again, that doesn't apply here to Winton. Just thought I'd give you a review of what a local designation would mean. And so this concludes my presentation in the part of the program, and I'm happy to answer questions now or just pass the mic over to my colleague Heather Slane, who is the architectural historian and consultant for this project.